If I already end up in spam.
Three things that are important if you want to get a message to actually get delivered. Who are we sending to? Then there's what and there's how.
Plus I had the poor list. I was terrible in creating the content.
If you've got a reputation problem, stop sending.
A lot of great points. So appreciate you sharing all of this. So you've been running Email Ninjas for about 2.5 years now. Before that, you worked for SparkPost, and before that, you worked for Message Systems. So that was the time when you start picking up that sending reputation and email deliverability, or that was before that when you work as software engineer? Can you give us a little bit background there?
Absolutely. So I started out back in about 2003. I was working. I got a job with an open source database company called MySQL. And part of that was speaking at a number of conferences on databases and development. And the founders of Message Systems were also regular speakers at these conferences. And so we got to know each other through that. And I'd been in databases for a few years, and they said, hey, do you want to try a change? I said, sure, sounds like we'd be good to get into something new. So 2006, then I joined what was at the time not even Message Systems. It was originally called OmniTI. And it was a consulting firm that did site scalability for large-scale websites. And one of the challenges that all large-scale websites eventually run into is how to scale their email. And the reason why, of course, is that there's pretty much not a single website out there that doesn't use email in some way, shape, or form in order to drive the operation of the website, whether it's signups, password confirmations, transactions, receipts, all of that. Eventually, there's going to be an email component. And so they looked at what was available at the time for email technology and realized that none of it was really designed to scale. It all came from the era before commercial mail, where universities were trying to run networks and operate in that way. And so they started from scratch. They said, let's build a new mail server. We'll make it designed to get to these high levels of scalability. And by the time I joined, it was in version 2, but we were dealing with some of the biggest email senders in the world. I mean, we've worked with large social networks and finance companies and travel companies, and pretty much anyone that has a large number of users is sending a large amount of mail. And I stayed there from 2006 all the way through to 2018. And I have since branched off on my own, essentially, to help support any large-scale sending companies that look to be successful with email, especially when they send from their own servers on-prem. That's kind of our focus here, is how do we help those on-prem senders to successfully send and, more importantly, get the messages to the inbox.
Got it. So what would be the typical companies that you currently work with or you're helping with from the email sending standpoint? Is that the companies that are sending thousands or hundred thousands or millions transactional emails per se, or they're more like cold emailing agencies that are utilizing emails primarily for their sales processes? Can you kind of just speak to that?
So we worked with a bit of both. There's essentially a couple of different categories when you get into the very large senders. The first one is often the email service providers. And so at the end of the day, they are, again, an on-prem email sending company. It's just that their on-prem mail that they send is on behalf of third parties who are using it as an off-prem vendor. So the Mailchimps of the world, the Awebers, the Constant Contacts, all of the gamut of email service providers are all sending mail on-prem, even though for them it's external customers. From there, you get into companies like social networks that are sending large amounts of transactional mails. So they don't do a lot of cold email. It's updates and it's information and it's confirmations. Right. There's also companies out there that send what we call transactional service providers. So SparkPost, which I previously worked at, is an example of that, where they're not giving you a whole campaign tool to work with to manage your list and your content and all that. They assume you have an application that just needs the ability to send mail and you don't want to set it up yourself. So they'll give you an API or they'll give you an endpoint to talk to, and they'll take care of everything after that. It's up to you to figure out what you're sending and who you're sending it to, and they take care of the rest. And then you do get your cold senders, and they tend to use different services as well. You've got your outreach.ios, your various other tools, and it's one of the most challenging markets to work in simply because it It is, of course, where you're trying to send mail to people who aren't expecting it
Right.
necessarily, and that presents its own challenges that have to be dealt with. So I've worked with essentially companies in all of those categories,
Uh-huh.
and they each have different tactics they need to be successful.
Right. And that was, the reason why I asked the question, because obviously if you are sending emails through Mailchimp and you have some challenges with your deliverability, obviously your setup and the way you approach this problem will be totally different from when you have problems with Outreach.io or by sending out cold emails or doing some prospecting work, right?
Absolutely.
So I definitely would love to speak to both. So right now you help these organizations with sort of like auditing their current infrastructure just to understand where they are right now, and then implementing some of those best practices and the tools, and then sort of like helping them to improve and maintain and make sure that everything works. That's sort of like the tier of services that you offer, correct?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
we work in both essentially the technology side and the practices side. One of the things I tell people when it comes to delivering messages to the inbox is I always refer to it as the equivalent of a three-legged stool. There's three things that are important if you want to get a message to actually get delivered. The first is the who. Then there's what, and there's how. And when it comes to who, it's a matter of saying, who are we sending these messages to? How did we get their information? Did they sign up for this? Did they double opt in, actually confirm that they want to receive the mail? But not only is it a matter of how do we get someone into our list that we're communicating with, the who also involves how do we maintain that list afterwards? Because one of the major challenges that you're going to have when you're trying to keep your deliverability up, regardless of how you send, okay, or what service you're using, is realizing that the ISPs, the Gmails, the mailbox providers, the Comcast, Verizons, they're judging whether or not to accept your mail. First of all, they're going to figure out what mail together represents your mail. They're using AI as part of that. They're looking for commonalities, different things. Is it the same sender domain, same sender email address? But they even get into patterns of, are you using the same template? Even if you change domains, change sender name, they'll see patterns in the template that you use for your sends, and they'll still accumulate that mail together. And after they do that, they're trying to identify, what is your engagement like? Are your recipients actually engaged with your messaging? We've come a long way from where it used to be. Typically, and if you go back in history of deliverability, people would talk about saying, oh, don't use this word, don't use that word, don't use free in the subject line, don't use drug names, these kind of things. I used to work with pharmacies that were trying to send out refill reminders and notifications. They had challenges if they used pharmaceutical names in their
Right.
subject lines, but those days are gone now. They don't rely near as heavily on looking at content and looking at subject line. They're simply looking and saying, we let your messages get through to a subset of your recipients. What did they do? Did they put it in the spam folder? Did they read it and immediately delete it? Did they forward it to their friend? Did they reply? The more engaged people are, the better you do. And so a key thing for engagement, very simply, is clicks and opens, right? Those are the base fundamental things we're looking for. Did they click? Did they open? And that's done based on a ratio. So it's how many did you send to and how many actually engaged with the message. There's only two ways to improve the ratio. You can either find out a way to make them engage more, or you can decrease the number you send to. And so that's where the who comes into play, is to say, if you have people on your lists that haven't replied in 90 days or ever, or they've never clicked, they've never opened, and you keep sending to them, you're dropping that ratio. You're showing the mailbox providers that you're simply not, taking into account the fact that nobody's paying attention to your mail, and that you have dead addresses. The other risk with dead addresses is they become, essentially over time, some mailbox providers will shut down dead accounts, and then they will turn around and reopen them after a couple of months of saying no such user. They turn them into spam traps. They say, okay, Bob at Yahoo, he hasn't used his account in 2 years. We're going to shut it down. We're going to say there's no such user. There's no Bob at Yahoo. 3 months later, we reopen Bob at Yahoo. And if you're still sending to Bob at Yahoo, we assume you have bad list practices. All of that comes into the who. Who are we sending to? Not only how are we bringing them in, making sure they've opted in, making sure we've acquired them in a clean way, but are we maintaining the list once we've added people to it? And I've gone into organizations that have never cleaned their lists. And they have tens of thousands of users that are simply no longer there. They're not listening, they're not opening, they're not clicking. And once we cleaned those recipients out of the list, we saw massive improvements in results, simply because the mailbox providers saw that the ratio of people who were opening and engaging and clicking with the mail was up. Not because we made it more compelling or put in better calls to action, but simply because instead of trying to get this number higher, we made this number smaller, and it results in a higher ratio. So that's kind of the who. Who are we sending to? And then obviously there's the what are we sending? And that's a matter of saying, is it compelling? Is it legal? Obviously a major concern to this day. But for most people, it is by default. So the list acquisition is much more controlled than the content, unless you're in medical and financial. Right. You usually don't have a concern there. But is it compelling? Is there a clear call to action? Because again, that ratio that we're talking about is based on engaging, how many engaged out of how many were sent to. So we fixed this down here with the who. Now we're working on the what. I went to an organization that said, hey, we have very bad deliverability on a stream that we were using to update customers on what changed in the latest release of our product. Mm-hmm. And it was going well, and then all of a sudden it fell through the floor. They got no deliverability at all. They were wondering what they could do or what they were doing wrong. And it turns out that as engineers, they wrote a software update email that was very good for engineers. It said, here's the new release, here's what changed in it. And it had all the information those people needed in the email itself. The problem was those people, and open tracking is never reliable. You can't count on it.
Right.
It doesn't give you a real indication. Too many people have images turned off. All we ever use open tracking for is a trend. Is it going up? Is it going down? They had 0 clicks. And the reason they had 0 clicks is they had 0 links in the email. They were sending out a message that gave the person that received it all the information they needed. They didn't have to click on anything. There was no links to learn more about something or what have you. And the mailbox providers looked at their mail stream and said, no one is engaging with this mail. And so we're going to assume that it's spam. And so what we did with them is we said, look, you need to add a read more. You need to give them, instead of giving them a long email, which also really is hard to read, a long newsletter that just keeps going. We said a highlight, read more, a highlight, read more. As soon as they did that, their users started clicking the read more because they wanted this information. And by clicking on the read more link, it showed the mailbox providers who are monitoring this, hey, these users are clicking on these links very regularly. And as soon as we did that, it turned out that their deliverability went up again. They were getting back to the inbox because now the users were engaging with the message. So clear calls to action, compelling content, leaving a user wanting something more rather than giving it all to them in the email. These were the things that were able to take that what and make it more successful.
Based on where we are at right now in terms of our email outreach, and maybe because my team does a lot of cold outreach and prospecting work, we've seen that if you include one or several or as many as you can links, external links to other websites, then it will tell the ISPs or blacklists that sort of like that email might have some malware or whatever, or lead to some unauthorized site. That's why they tend to put these kind of emails with links on the bottom of the list, or just send them straight to the spam folders. Mm-hmm. Is that what you've seen with your campaigns as well, or that's totally kind of bullshit here, and that having links or not having links is not relevant?
It is and it isn't. Let's go with that. So the best and worst and most common answer to almost any question is it depends. Where it depends with links is this. A lot of the ISPs, the mailbox providers, are starting to use AI more and more as a way of doing spam filtering. Gmail in particular is very strong in their practices these days. And one of the things that they do with that is they look at thousands of data points to determine whether your message has something in common with either a desirable or an undesirable message and act accordingly. And so along those lines, there are certain practices with links that you really want to avoid. And one of those is link shorteners. Link shorteners are the worst thing you can possibly use when you're composing an email message. First of all, you're composing the message in HTML. There's no reason to shorten the links. You're not sending a text message. You're not trying to give somebody a link that they can type in by hand, like in a magazine. You're simply using an ahref equals. So your URL can be as long as it needs to be because your link text is going to be short. Right. So, but what happens is that a lot of malicious actions occur using link shorteners to hide what is actually going on behind the link, right? So if I'm trying to send someone malware, I want to use a link shortener, ideally, because they're not going to know what's at that domain, because most of us have gotten used to identifying, hey, this message looks like phishing. It says Microsoft, but it's actually coming from Microsoft dot third party dot whatever domain it is. It's clearly spam, but if I put it behind Bitly, right? Well, now all I see is bit.ly. Yeah. I don't know what's behind there. But that's why the AI systems and even just the manually created practices used by anti-spam professionals at these mailbox providers, they don't trust link shorteners. There's few exceptions to it. If you run a private link shortener that you created yourself that is using your own top level domain, then it's only going to be used by you. It won't be recognized by the AI except with use with your mail. The other thing that comes into a challenging situation is we've seen recipients who do get content flagged. It's not just what domain you send your email from. If you have a domain that you link to in common with something used a lot by spam or phishing, then yes, you'll lose a few points in the filtering system by virtue of the fact that you're linking to those things. There's a lot of fake mail, for example, that goes out claiming to be from PayPal, from Microsoft. Using any of those domains without legitimately coming from Microsoft.com or PayPal.com, even if that is how you receive payment. Like, let's say, hey, you're sending out a purchase order, click here for PayPal to pay us. You would not want to do so because it's got such a strong correlation with phishing that you would rather have a link to your website /payments and then that payment page wrap or redirect to PayPal. You really want to avoid any kind of URL in your email that has anything in common. I mean, it really comes down to this. What does a spammer do? What does a phisher do? Make sure you don't do it, right? Because it's just, they look for patterns. The software is all about a pattern, all about saying, how much in common does this have with spam? If it has too much in common, then it is spam, right? That's how the logic works, and you have to avoid doing anything similar to the spammers.
Right. So if you have original content, like 100% original content created on your blog, on your website, and you just attach that link to the email, then you should be okay, right? Because everything is original. You're not referencing to any sort of like Microsoft or PayPal or any triggering or the sources that phishers might use, so on and so forth. So that's basically you're okay with your email deliverability without losing any points. Okay.
And you also have to be careful. I've worked with clients in the past who've used acquisition marketing to generate new subscribers, new customers to themselves. And of course, there's tools you can use to vet when you're going to use a third-party affiliate to try to create new subscribers. But you have to be very careful about letting them use your domain in their email. If you can't 100% be sure that their practices won't be spam, you really want to make sure that they're not linking to your website. Because again, what happens is if they send out a spammy message that links to your site to get you a new customer, and the ISPs, the mailbox providers, decide that email was spam, they're going to immediately go through that email and say, okay, well, all the links in here are now suspicious. If they have too much in common with something else, because this is what we ran into with the client. They themselves were sending clean. They were using proper signups. Those acquisition subscribers had to sign up with them in order to continue receiving mail. They were doing everything right. But one of these affiliates that they were using for marketing was doing everything wrong. And because they linked straight to their domain instead of to a landing page that referred over, their domain URL was tainted. and actually had to be removed from the spam house domain block list because they had determined that it was a spammy sender. And guilt by association meant that now their domain was considered spammy as well. So it's one of the things you have to be careful of.
And I think that is also to the point that, for example, what Mailchimp does is that whenever you start sending out any campaigns with Mailchimp, they always track that engagement rate and then the bounce rate and all of those metrics. And in case you have very low engagement rates or you cannot send them proofs where did you get the list from, then they would kind of block you. So you will not be able to import any leads to the platform, anything whatsoever. They're going to just block you, right? Because that affects their own reputation, right? Because if you can be using their platform sending out a bunch of spam emails, then they will ruin their sort of like deliverability as well for their Mailchimp brand, because the way it's sent, right? Like, I mean, those ESPs that you mentioned, how do they send emails? Because usually whenever you are sending out emails directly from, for example, I'm using Gmail or G Suite for my business, right? I send emails through G Suite and I have my IP, my servers and all that technical stuff connected to my G Suite. However, when I'm using Mailchimp, they will still kind of give some kind of server or IP that I'll be using for Mailchimp to send out emails. So I'm not sending them natively from my G Suite. Is that correct, or that's sent differently?
No matter how your mail is sent, there's a few different components that are involved that are happening behind the scenes. We'll open up the hood for a second. It always starts out with something that is creating the email. So if you say, for example, if I'm sitting here and I'm using G Suite, I'm using Office 365, I have my copy of Outlook. It creates a message it uses a standard email protocol, SMTP. Most people don't realize it doesn't just send it straight to whoever it's going to, or even to like if I'm sending to you a Gmail, it doesn't talk straight to Gmail. My copy of Outlook goes to a mail server at Microsoft and says, here's an email. It's going to, Michael at Gmail.
Right.
And it says, okay, I'll take it. I'm responsible for it now. And then it connects out. And usually in this case, goes straight to Gmail's mail server and says, hey, I've got an email for Michael. Gmail says, okay, I'm going to do a few checks on it first. And then says, okay, I'll take responsibility for the message from here. We call that 250OK. There's actually there's a brand out there called 250OK based exactly on that. That's why it's called that. But that server says, okay, 250OK, I've got the message now. I'm responsible for it. And then it does a little bit more filtering, and then it puts it into a mailbox server where it waits for you to then pick the message up. So when you take your tools and connect them to Gmail, instead of using Outlook, you're telling your tool, talk to Gmail's or G Suite's mail server and inject it in. It's generally speaking not a great practice to use G Suite for anything other than direct corporate mail, because it can taint your domain reputation, and Google will eventually, if they see too much marketing traffic that gets complaints, you can wind up losing your corporate email capabilities because you used your corporate email stack for your marketing email, which is why we generally recommend people go with a Mailchimp. But if you have a tool, for example, that's talking to Gmail or talking straight to the server and it's doing all the work except for the sending, that's typically where people start to use tools like SparkPost, SendGrid, PeppyPost, Mailgun, all of these third-party tools. A lot of companies even use Amazon SES. And the reason why is that, again, they take care of all of the delivery after you've composed the message. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, they're not attached to your corporate mail. So you're not worried that the G Suite's going to cut you off entirely and now you can't even send your business mail because it's going out through a separate service in this case. It makes it more interchangeable.
Got it. Why then it happens that, for example, I start getting my emails into spam folder. My clients say, hey, Michael, I didn't receive your email. It went to spam. And the reason is that because I'm using a lot of my marketing through Mailchimp, for example, or can I be affected by being blocked using that ESP tag with my main infrastructure, or I cannot be because these two entities are separate?
So one of the things you want to look at doing there, and getting back actually to the question about Mailchimp. So in the case of Mailchimp and all of the larger ESPs, what they've done is they've created a few different components. The one is a database that holds all your subscribers, a database that holds all your templates, and then a set of servers that take your template and your subscribers, mash them together into fully formed emails, and then they drop them into mail servers. Yet again, those mail servers talk to Gmail, try to deliver the message. Gmail, and remember what I said, the AI is looking for patterns,
Right.
it's looking for reasons why messages should be associated together. It is actually very intelligent at being, and all the ISPs and mailbox providers generally are, they do have the ability to, if you give them the right hints, they will actually segregate the tracking of your reputation as a corporate mail server and your reputation as a marketing mail server. Where it can get into challenges is when you use your top level domain for both. If your emails are coming from, like if mine are coming from mike@emailninjas.com, and I'm also sending out marketing mail, and I'm doing it through Mailchimp, but I'm also using emailninjas.com, like newsletter@emailninjas.com, I'm using the same top level domain for both. And what's happening is then they're saying, well, I'm going to associate those two together. You don't want to use completely separate domains. Okay, so you'll see people say, well, I'm going to set up emailninjas-mail.com for my marketing.
Right.
It looks to some of the services as if you're trying to split your reputation and spread your traffic out too much. It's actually simple as simply going and saying, I'm going to use news.emailninjas.com as the domain I send from. So it's newsletter@news.emailninjas.com that becomes my Mailchimp sending domain. What that does is it does two things. It tells Gmail that you're still one entity because you're using subdomains, but it also says this subdomain represents a different stream of mail than usual. And you'll see things like notifications.emailninjas.com, which would be used for transactional mail, like, hey, here's a purchase confirmation. So I'm using a different subdomain for each mail stream. And what that's doing is it's indicating to Gmail, no subdomain, that's corporate mail. News dot, that's marketing. Confirmation dot, that's transactional. If they really don't like what you're doing, they're still going to aggregate everything together, and they're going to say, we're going to block you overall because we don't like what you're doing in this stream. But what it does mean is that if your corporate mail is good and your transactional is good and your marketing's a little whatever, at least they affect your marketing differently than your other two. Now, it can be, like I said, if your practices on Mailchimp are particularly poor, you could very well wind up blocked across the board. But if you're using the top domain for everything you do, you're not giving them those hints that say, this is my transactional, this is my corporate, this is my marketing, so that at least they only ding your marketing most of the time.
Got it. This is a very great insight, Mike. I've actually never thought of using subdomains for kind of putting different categories of emails into different channels. Awesome. So we discussed who, we discussed what, and now it is how, right? Why so the how is.
I'll give you a little bit there. The how can mean a couple of things. It can mean, are you sending on-prem? Do you have mail servers that you're running yourself, that you're connecting your systems to? Whether that's on-prem has different meanings these days. It could mean in your data center. It could mean in someone's cloud. A lot of on-prem senders are now actually in AWS senders or in Azure senders or what have you. A lot of them are still using their own data centers though. And one of the reasons for that is that they're separating sending reputation using a variety of IP addresses. And you probably saw this when you're working with a Mailchimp or what have you.
Right.
They'll say, hey, set up your SPF record using this IP address because this is the server that your mail is going to come out of. Depending on the complexity of the vendor and how well they do, a lot of organizations, they're starting to move into services like AWS, but the challenge used to be getting clean IP addresses to use for that. You cannot set up a mail server using like standard AWS or Azure where it's going to bring it online, take it offline, different IP address every time, because the mailbox providers, one of the big factors they use to decide what they think of your reputation is they track it according to IP address. Sending domain has a big thing to do as well, but they're still to a certain degree looking at the IP. So you can't be hopping around the IP space, sending from here and there. They often refer to that as snowshoeing. It's a spammer practice. The spammers realize, hey, they need a certain amount of traffic to decide whether they like or dislike your reputation. If we stay under that threshold and just use a whole lot of IPs, we could maybe bypass some of that anti-spam technology. The reality is, no, you can't. They will figure that out. They call it snowshoeing. It's a quick way to get blocked. So, when you're on-prem on your own servers, obviously then you're able to say this IP is for our mail, set your server up, point it out of that IP, and away you go. It's not something that marketers should really do unless they have the skill set in-house. You'll see, I've seen a lot of people say, oh, I set up my own server, I'm running it out of this or that, and it's working. And the answer is, well, it worked because you tried to test email. You try to send yourself one email. Gmail doesn't care about one email at a time. It works, it shows up in your inbox. As soon as they try to start a campaign, all of a sudden they're blocked. They don't know why. It's because they don't have the skill set to get it properly configured. They don't know how to manage deliverability. They don't know how to get those kind of things pushing through. And that's where the challenges can come into play, and they can wind up getting blocked. So that's where a lot of senders, unless you have either the resources to outsource that skill set, which is what we do, or you have the resources to acquire those people, most senders, I specifically say, like if you're starting out, find a Mailchimp, find a constant contact, use AWS, use Amazon SES, SendGrid, SparkPost, what have you, because they take care of that knowledge. That leaves you just worried about, you don't want to worry about the how, you just want to worry about the who and the what. Worrying about the how is something that you have to have expertise for. So the other kind of how, though, is which service provider do you use? Mm-hmm. And especially this time of year, it's kind of coincidental. I don't know about you, but I watch, when I'm starting to get my marketing through commercials and some through my email, everyone at this time of year is promoting weight loss, fitness. Here's a new gym. Go to this gym. Go to that gym. And you'll see people in message forums, they'll always say, well, I don't like my deliverability with Mailchimp. Who should I use? And I tell people, changing an ESP is like changing which gym you go to. If I came to you and said, hey, I'm not losing enough weight at this gym, what gym should I use? Most people aren't going to name a different gym, right? They're going to say to me, it probably has more to do with what you're doing at the gym or how often you're going to the gym than it does with which gym you went to. Like if I said, hey, I want better exercise equipment, unless I'm really using that equipment well and know how it works and getting the most out of it and realizing that, hey, this one doesn't have this machine and I do need this machine for what I do, they're going to say, you're crazy. You don't change gyms to lose more weight, right? And we tell people the same thing. You don't change ESPs to get more deliverability, because deliverability has very little to do with which ESP you use. Some do have certain tools that help you get better deliverability if you use them right. But the reality is that deliverability has so much more to do with what you're sending and who you're sending it to than it has to do with what service you're using to send it. And so that's the first thing we always tell people with the how. There are many reasons that you could change ESPs, right? You might be getting a better price. Maybe you like a journey builder that one provides that the other doesn't provide, or it has a better merge functionality. But never, ever do you change an ESP because your only reason is my deliverability isn't good. If you have poor deliverability, that has so much more to do with what you're doing than what they're providing that there's never a reason, that's never a good reason to change. So we always want to look at the practices before we start changing out the stack if it's purely for deliverability purposes.
Not so long ago, about like 5-10 years ago, the competitive edge was a tag that you were using. For example, if I'm using Outreach.io and my competitors are not using, then I have a competitive tag because my process is more efficient. I have the more superior way of doing things. That's why I can land more money or generate more revenue, or I can have an advantage, right? Or for example, like some companies are using Zoom Info, right, for some of their leads generation, right? So if I use leads from Zoom Info, then I have a higher quality of leads, and that's why I can land more money, or so on and so forth. But because the access to these tools is easier these days, and many companies are using the same tools, then there is no competitive advantage right now. So the reality is that you need to be very creative with the way you do things, right? So you cannot just rely on certain tech or certain process to put you in front of your competitors, but rather you need to be very creative and do some thinking work. So what I mean by that, for example, when you mentioned that the spam filters can track the categories of people that you're emailing to and say that they already been emailed to with spam, so it probably is also the list distribution and outreach, right? What if you, for example, if you do the manual list building? So what if you access multiple sources and you create an original list of emailing addresses that is not out there, that people can have access by paying $100 or $1,000 or whatever? In this way, this item can be addressed, because then whenever you email the same number of people in the list, then it's probably not going to count as that someone is emailing them in, so that you can be one step ahead of the people that are going to be taking off a few points from their email deliverability from ESPs. Does it make sense?
It does. There's certain things to be careful of. The one thing to keep in mind is there are definitely things out there called honeypots. Okay, so you have when it comes to building lists by acquiring email, there's two ways to build a list. One is to acquire subscribers, and the other is to acquire email addresses. And there's a difference, right? When you say you're acquiring an email address, maybe you're going to a website, you're going to a company site, you're looking for a directory, right. You're looking for email addresses on it. You're scraping. Right? Scraping is highly risky because there are always going to be entities that are there. Even on my own site, there are email addresses that are hidden in the HTML that an automated scraper will find that aren't actually displaying to an end user. The whole point being, if I see something to that address, I just put it on a block list, right? If they email the fake address that they shouldn't even be able to see, then they're using automation. I'm not interested in hearing what you have to say. From there, though, there's also organizations that are running block lists, and those block list operators are not just you doing, like when I do that, I'm doing it for my mail, for my domain. Block list operators are running the same thing, but they're looking to create a list of anyone that is sending to addresses that they scraped. Mailbox operators hate it, right? And it doesn't matter whether the users at their thing engage or not. You could have very high engagement, but as soon as a block list identifies that you've been scraping addresses, especially in an automated fashion, you'll get blocked even though 90% of your customers are engaging with what you said. So that differs from acquiring subscribers. When you acquire subscribers, you are getting in front of them and saying, there is something of value for you. If you start receiving these emails, can we have your address? And then they give it. So that's where, more than anything, if you want to be successful in getting consistent deliverability, and I know that there's always challenges to how you do this, especially in certain areas of sales, but if you can get in front of somebody's eyes through another channel and get them to subscribe and get them on that list, it'll be bulletproof. You'll be able to deliver. You can double opt-in. You won't have those concerns about getting blocked. Whenever you're trying to just reach out at random, and there's other options to go with, but the whole idea is that the safest way will always be an organic subscribe, especially one that's double opted in, right? If you can get people into that, you'll always see a lot more success. When you're doing cold email, you almost want to avoid doing it at a scale that requires automation. Generally speaking, while you can still use staff, use tools to do so and give them some flows around it, the best way to be using a tool like Outreach is that your sales team is going in, they're composing a message that is researched, that is actually applicable to that person. Believe me, I'm a founder of a company. I know exactly what an automated sales outreach email looks like. I know, we saw your site and hey, we think we could help you. If you saw my site, you would not say that to me because you'd know that that's not what we do. Like, we've seen your site. Would you like developers? I don't have a software product. It's a services company. Clearly I don't, but you're not doing enough research to customize your message, right? If it is written to that particular recipient, and not only does that mean that it's more compelling, more engaging, more likely to get, a click through or reply, but it also slows the process down enough that the tools aren't detecting automation and aren't looking at it as an automated marketing message. They're looking at it as a one-to-one email. So I'd almost say that, Again, do it clean, do it well. You're almost better off sending from your corporate email account in a one-to-one fashion than you ever will be trying to use these automation tools at a large scale, because that's not what gets blocked.
Yeah, like you send 50 emails, send 100 emails, right? But make sure those emails are well researched, well vetted, basically. They're one-to-one. And in that way, you can have a good email group. Cool. Awesome,
Write
Mike.
50 emails. Yeah.
Like 50
write 50 emails, send 50 emails. You will always have more success than gathering 1,000 addresses and sending out on one template. Not only from a deliverability perspective, but frankly, from a sales engagement perspective.
Right. Got it. While we still have just a few minutes left, wanted to talk with you about two things. The first is, are there any tools out there that you can recommend to measure email deliverability and sending reputation in general? I know there are some tools that you can check what kind of blacklist you're in, some that would tell what your DNS records are, but maybe there are some tools that you can recommend that are more sort of like popular in the space that I can plug into and then just understand where I am right now and what my sales team is doing in terms of, and where, what I need to do to kind of at least fix that or address that. And then the second question is, and again, once you speak to what kind of tools are out there for testing, I've noticed there are anyone out there that can actually help you to fix it. Because typically when you're already in spam or you have some email deliverability problems, then no one gonna give you, or there aren't anyone out there that could tell you, hey, this is what you do, and then you're going to be okay. You can fix that. Usually people will just say, hey, change this, move this, spend time, do this. So they will tell you what the problem is or why you end up in this situation, but they wouldn't tell you, okay, this is what you need to do to fix it. So maybe you know any tools that actually fix it. And I know maybe the trend in 2020 was building up sending reputation, as well as balancing out some of those bad emails with the good emails or whatever. So if you can comment on this, would be great as well.
Yeah. So as far as tools are concerned, we're in an interesting time right now, actually. So historically, there were the largest vendor was a company called ReturnPath. And ReturnPath offered a number of tools. You can still use some of them for free. Even if you have a sending IP, you can use the sender score. Just Google sender score. You can look up your current sender score. It'll give you, some idea of why it's low versus high. The reality is it's just a collection of different data points to produce a number. And they were also a company that provided consulting services to say, hey, this is what you can do to improve that sender score. They even had a program called Sender Score Certified, which is if your score was high enough, you could get a certification from them that was theoretically going to help you get to the inbox better. The chicken and egg question with that tool was always a matter of saying, if your practices are good enough to get a high score, then your practices are good enough to get to the inbox, so you don't need the certification because you're already certifiable, right? And so there was always that kind of a circular logic to that one. The other thing that they did provide, though, when you were certified, was some wonderful data that they got from the inbox providers around how much of your mail came in, how it was engaged. It was actually, instead of you using tracking links and whatnot, those ISPs would actually feed that data direct to ReturnPath, and ReturnPath was allowed to show it to you because you were certified. So that was actually the bigger benefit of certification, was the data you had access to, authentic from the providers themselves. One of the biggest competitors that came out against ReturnPath was 250OK, which provides, again, not only tools to let you know how many spam traps are on your lists, are you getting good deliverability here and there, previews of your email to see if it looks right. A lot of the same tool set. Both of those companies have actually been recently acquired by a company called Validity, and they've produced a new platform called Everest, which combines the best of those two merged companies into a single interface that's definitely generating a lot of interest out there. As they've done that, various other companies have started to create their own set of tools around checking if it went to the inbox and whatnot. And they've all got different values, but most of them, the challenge with these tools is that they're not simple to implement. They're not inexpensive. Some of them can be economical. I still have a number of customers, and we do work with Validity on a regular basis, but you have to be a large enough scale sender to justify the cost. The free tools are not really going to get you anywhere. You can find little image or message preview tools that are essentially running it through a copy of Spam Assassin and letting you know what the Spam Assassin score was. But these days, that kind of testing is not what actually gets used by the mailbox providers. So it's good for making sure some of your, you've crossed your T's and dotted your I's, but it's not going to give you an accurate impression of what's going to happen because, again, these days, it's engagement, right? And there aren't tools to really tell you, will this message get engaged with before you actually send it? The other one that's been, so you're starting to see a lot of vendors. This is one of the reasons why you would change gyms, as it were, right? You have vendors like SparkPost who are now offering some much more, a lot of the companies are going this way now. Let me give you more analytics. Let me let you know more about what happened. Nowadays, you do choose a service provider to a certain degree on how much data can they give you and make useful to you. Do they have good reporting of clicking, opening? Do they give you some of the services now? You can use organizations like Audience Point, which you can take a list, feed it into Audience Point. It'll not only tell you which ones in there are completely invalid and shouldn't be sent to, but they can also say, based on history from a big pool of data, which of these recipients are likely to click on travel email or likely to click on finance, and even at what time of the day should you send to them. So tools like that can be very useful because it at least tells you this is what your subscriber base is looking like that you've brought in and which ones you should completely avoid sending to, which ones are most likely to engage, right? And a lot of these tool providers are out there now and they'll tell you things like, and this is very important, they can identify things like disposable mail domains. Are they using one of those services that gives you a throwaway email address? If so, throw away that email address, right? Don't send to it. It's not going to result in good things. So those kind of tools are out there. And if you look for things like Inbox Tester, Inbox Preview, you can always find new options that are out there. We do a lot of work, though, with Audience Point and Validity. There's companies like Webula, Kickbox. There's a dozen companies that can help you to clean a list before you send to it and give you some insights into it. And most of them are now starting to give you inbox testing tools to say, send to a seed list, see if it went through, that kind of thing. They are out there. At the same time, from a deliverability advice perspective, there are definitely different organizations out there, larger ones and smaller ones. There's a lot of freelancers available to help organizations who aren't looking to bring someone in full time. There's companies like us that are going to say, just either do a quick audit of your deliverability and practices or give you ongoing engagement and assistance. Obviously, there's a lot more work involved in cleaning up a bad situation than there is in just making sure that your good one goes better. So, depending on what goes wrong, there's online groups you can look at. There's deliverability groups inside of LinkedIn, for example, that can be engaged with. But the key is to obviously avoid the bad situation if possible, and otherwise just shop around, look for deliverability is still a pretty common word. Deliverability consultant is a very easy search term. Just be aware it's a very uncommon and developed skill set. So you're not going. You can go to Fiverr and find somebody who's going to charge you $15 an hour, and you're going to be no better off than when you started. So it's an investment, and if you're not ready to make it, then pick a service provider that gives you those options, right? Most of the big ones, SendGrid, SparkPost, as transactional providers, obviously not your self-serves like Mailchimp, but you go to a slightly larger one. And again, Mailchimp has a partner program as well, actually, for deliverability advice. But if you get to a larger shop, you can start to have access for a fee to their deliverability people and staff in-house. So it's a matter of finding that expertise and taking advantage of it.
Got it. What if I already, so you spoke about testing and identifying and understanding the reasons of what's my situation is right now. What about if I already ended up in spam? So what I mean is that, what if I already have a setup and I know that the problem was I had the poor list. I was terrible in creating the content. So now my corporate emails are going to spam. What next for me? What should I do to fix that? Because I understand the problem. I'm not going to do that anymore. But what next for me? So is there any advice of are there any tools that could help me to fix that, go me back on track, or it's just the time, it's a waiting time, so I just need to wait and that's it?
So the first thing I would say is there's an old piece of advice, which is if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Okay. And what I mean by that, and what we always tell people is, if you've got a reputation problem, stop sending. Just step back for a second, right? Don't, pause the campaigns. First thing you're going to look at is most deliverability issues are a product of poor engagement, right? So we're going to go to that list, and we're going to go to your history. So hopefully you've got the data, because you're going to go to your list and you're going to say, okay, we need to be aggressive here. Who do we have on this list that hasn't engaged with anything? No clicks, no opens, and pick a more aggressive number like 30 days, right? No clicks, no opens. It's been 30 days. Put them aside, right? Put them in a separate list that gets exempted from all sends, right? Or just take them off the list entirely. There are exceptions, but you better know exactly how your audience behaves if you're not going to use a more aggressive number. Like if you say, well, people only engage once every 4 months. All right, well then don't send so often. But at least for now, you're trying to, we're in triage. So we're going to take everybody off the list that hasn't engaged, in the last 30 days, right? So only new subscribers and less than 30-day engagement. That gets that kind of set aside. Maybe go out, try one of the list cleaning services, get anyone else off of there, and then wait a little bit, right? You don't have to stop all sending everywhere. Most senders don't have a global problem across all receiving domains. And if you do, make sure you've checked that you're on Spam House and whatnot. But it's usually like, I'm having trouble at Yahoo. I'm having trouble at Gmail. Well, then, okay, for a little bit, we're going to cool off Gmail, right? We're just going to stop sending. It's a difficult thing, but you're going to say, okay, we're going to stop sending, give it a week, right? Let their counters kind of reset and cool down. If you've really burned the reputation, we got to look at other options. But otherwise, give it a little bit of a wait. And if nothing's going through, we pause. Otherwise, we then come back. And when you come into any new send, when you're sending from a new IP, when you're trying to recover, it's about best foot forward, okay? The first clean we did was if they haven't engaged, they're out.
Right.
The second thing we should do is when we resume sending, we should pick the 10% of our recipients that are the most engaged, the people who are always clicking, always opening the mail that we send to them, and start sending to that 10%, right? If we're getting good results and we're getting into the inbox and we're getting our clicks and opens, then we're going to go to the next 20% of the most engaged. And we're going to send to them as well. And we're going to keep sorting our recipient group by the most engaged people and growing that until we're back to sending to all, but we're never bringing back that group that didn't engage in the last 30 days. And then that needs to become an ongoing thing. You need automation that essentially says, anytime somebody hits the 30-day mark and they haven't engaged in 30 days, they're cleaned off the list, right? Anyone new, ideally, like I said, if you can't do double opt-in, that means you've got to be doing at least some kind of vetting and cleaning, right? And those first couple of sends that you're going to give them, if you send to that new address and it hasn't engaged in 2 or 3 sends, clean it off again anyway, right? If you're not compelling enough, like if you can't, have a good welcome campaign, a good introduction. If you can't catch their attention and get them opening or clicking in 2 or 3 sends, clean them off anyway. Don't wait 30 days because they're impacting your ability. If anyone, monitor your feedback loops, right? Look for those "this is spam" button clicks, notifications, any of that immediately gone, right? You always hear these things, canned spam requires 10 days, right? The mailbox providers don't care about canned spam. They'll use it to sue you if they had reason to, but otherwise they're not looking at. I've heard this so many times. Oh, we're canned spam compliant. Gmail doesn't care. If you cannot, well, first of all, you can't call up Gmail, but if you could call up Gmail and you said, but we're canned spam compliant, they'd laugh and hang up the phone, right? Their customers don't care that you're canned spam compliant. Their customers care that you're sending them a piece of email they don't want. If you wait 10 days to get them off of that, they're going to hit the spam button again and again, and your reputation is tanked, right? So just immediately unsubscribe someone. If they spam complaint, immediate unsubscribe. In those first couple of emails, and ideally going forward, make it clear how to unsubscribe. Don't hide it at the bottom. Don't blend it into the rest of the text. Don't make it tiny. Here's the thing. People will do one of two things if they don't want your mail. They'll click unsubscribe or they'll click spam. If they can't find make it much easier for them to hit unsubscribe than to hit spam. Because if they hit spam, it affects your sending reputation across the board. If they hit unsubscribe, you lose one subscriber, but you're still able to send, right? You always want to make it easier for them to unsubscribe than to hit the spam button.
Perfect. One last thing, and apologize for taking longer than we were booked for. What do you think about the concept of balancing out the bad reputation or emails that went to spam with the emails that you manually put back into inbox? So let me give you some context here. So if I send an email to 100 people and 5% of them mark me as spam, for example, so then obviously my sending reputation will go down. So next time I send another 100 email, then some of those emails start getting into spam folder by definition because my previous batch of prospects marked that email as spam, right? What if I send 200 or 300 emails to my email addresses and I go to that spam folder when I receive them and I unspam those emails? It's basically telling the spam filter that, you know what, those emails are actually shouldn't be there in the spam folder because they're good. So what I did, I engaged with them, I marked it in spam. So now for every 5 or 10 emails that went to spam, I can send 20 or 50 emails to my email addresses and anti-spam them. So that's sort of like as telling the spam filter then it's okay. So that all the subsequent emails will go to the inbox by definition, as I already sort of like kind of defined that for the spam filter, saying that those emails that went to spam was a mistake because they actually are okay because I just unspammed them with a lot of users. Does it make sense? Do you think that this kind of concept might work, or that's some kind of fairy tale out of the blue or whatever?
I've seen that idea enough times that I'm quite sure Gmail already anticipates it and has a team specifically to look for it, right? Never think you're smarter than Gmail. They've got more engineers, more money, more AI, more data than you ever will have. And I've seen them uncover many things. One of the and this is a common enough practice that people keep. You just reinvented a wheel that a lot of other people have thought of, and they've seen it enough times that it's something that they're looking for. If they see mailboxes that all they ever do, I mean, I'll be honest with you, how many people in their day-to-day lives do you think actually look in their spam folder and drag something out of it that was in there because it shouldn't have been in there? I am rare as an email professional that on my Outlook, I do have the spam folder for my account in the shortcut bar so I can look for the counter and I go in and look and try to pull something out. The average person does not. If Gmail identifies that there's a block of email addresses that regularly pop in and do nothing but pull messages out of the spam folder, they're going to disregard anything that group does. There's been companies that have done, for example, tools to provide to marketers where they've created helper applications that run on top of Gmail to make something easier for those users, but at the same time, they're also pulling the data about where those messages actually went and using it to provide to other people. Right. And Gmail has shut those companies down, and they were relatively legitimate. So they will find you, is essentially the answer I would give. They are looking for these practices. They are actively looking to shut them down. For it to be successful, those boxes would have to be spread around the world across multiple subnets. They're going to look for any kind of IP aggregation. Those mailboxes are going to have to almost always appear like they are acting normal, with the rare exception of pulling a message out of the spam folder. Seed lists are a similar concept, and they find them and they shut them down. It's part of what they do, is detecting abuse of the.
I know that there's a tool called Limelists. It's very similar to Outreach.io. And what they do this kind of warm up or sort of like this reputation building among their current clients. So if you list of their clients, that they exchange those emails because they already have access to the email. So they send emails. So they just ask you about the permission of sending emails between their clients. So they kind of talking to each other. And in that way, all of them are spread across the world. All of them are different IPs. All of them are legitimate email addresses, right? But it's more like So it's an interesting, right?
Yeah.
Sort of like
It's
solution there.
Those kind of practices will work until they don't, and then they will never work again.
Yeah. But then, the interesting thing is that we're going to figure out something new, right? So it's always like Google works on the stick, and we always sort of like find out how to utilize that stick with Google, and they create a bigger stick, and then people are creating something new, right? So it's going back and forth. So
and if you get something that works, don't tell anyone, right?
Yeah.
Because
yeah. Mike, listen, I really appreciate the time. So less a minute for those people that have email deliverability problems and want to talk to you, where can they find you? Should they talk to you on LinkedIn? Should they go to your website and sign up for the demo? How do they usually contact you?
Most of the time, just go to emailninjas.com. There's a big contact us button. We'll get in touch. We'll help people out.
Perfect. Mike, really appreciate the time. It's been really, really great. And there are some really great points that I've underlined for myself that I'm going to discuss with my team, because that's golden. So really, Mike, appreciate you sharing your time, experience, and knowledge. And for everyone who's listening to this, and personally for me and the team, thank you.
Happy to do so.
All right. You have a good one now.
Bye.
Happy holidays. Take care.